Hello all of you wonderful people, Jules here for WhatCulture.com, and today I want to talk to you about comic books that were a little bit too distracting. Now, what do I mean by this? I don't mean that you're in class and you're just reading it under a table because it's so engaging. I'm talking about the strange stuff that just makes you look at it and go, what is it that I am reading right now? It's the type of thing that you'll show to your friends, and once they point it out, it'll be like a glass being shattered in their mind because they won't be able to unsee it. So let me do you all a favour by making sure that you definitely see what I have seen. So, with this in mind, I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 things comic fans found too bloody distracting. Number 10. Weird anatomy. When you draw aliens, monsters, and bizarre happenings involving superheroes doing all sorts of weird and sometimes impossible poses, at least one of them is going to turn out a little funky at some point. However, there's a decided difference between a moment of funky arm placement and a comic that repeatedly has completely janky anatomy. While this suits some more of the surreal art styles, like A Serious House on Serious Earth, there are plenty that do not suit this. Rob Liefeld is the most well known for this, stuffing his male heroes so full of muscles that they look like steroid pump bulls more than strong men, and giving the women similarly boosted proportions. Now, I'm not saying that all of his artwork follows these rules, but the stuff that does is certainly distracting. If only because you're trying to figure out where they must all shop together to get such perfectly fitting clothes that can show every single individual muscle beneath them. This is also a trend when some artists are trying to make sexy poses for characters, as they often disregard things like, spines in order to make them look as bendy as possible, because who doesn't love a sexy bendy thing? Number 9. Huge text boxes. As a species that communicates through words, it translates that the vast majority of comics would have their characters speak, because otherwise it's basically a drawn silent film. But comics aren't novels, and many just enjoy comics because of the fact that they express stories and ideas without the need for walls and walls of text. Well, that is usually the case, because there does come the occasion where too much information has to be conveyed at one point in the story, leading to a monumental exposition dump in the form of huge text boxes. They serve a purpose, sure, but they do so in an undeniably clunky way that can disrupt the entire comic immensely. Nobody minds it every now and again, but if they're littered through a series, it feels more as though nobody planned on how to tell all of the important parts of the story through a mostly visual medium. Now, it can be done right, but it can also be done in a way that leaves you impressed that the artist was able to fit that much text into that small a space, so it can be a real gamble. Number 8. Phallic imagery. So it's worth saying from the off that this is a bit of a doozy. So as long as humanity has been able to draw, we've also been drawing genitalia as a bit of a laugh. It's a borderline instinct, and naturally this doesn't stop being a thing when it comes to art. Long have artists been hiding phallic imagery in animations, murals, and even comics. And as invested in the comic as you may be, it's hard not to be distracted by a casual spot of symbolic genitalia popping up when you least expected it, as this has been known to accidentally occur in plenty of comics, especially when sketchy stuff like tentacles or cannons appear. Number 7. Random storyline changes. So it's kind of hard to sort a comic event that spans multiple comic series without popping into some of them midway through a separate story arc. Actually, it's verging on impossible, which is why it happens quite a lot. And since bigger storylines are generally regarded by the noble comic overseers as more important, they tend to take precedent, meaning that if you keep up to date with a smaller series, there's a good chance that you'll be blindsided by a completely surprise event. Now, while this isn't totally a bad thing, as the characters that you enjoy will get to interact with the larger universe, there's more potential for drastic changes, and it can prove to be a little jarring, because ultimately, it won't last forever. After a couple of issues, or even one, things will just go back to normal, and the storyline that you were previously in will either continue or be dropped for a new one. Now, both of these possibilities are frankly weird, because you either had an awkward break from the current story, or had the old one randomly dropped and then totally forgotten about. Worse yet, sometimes comics are ended midway through a storyline simply because the higher-ups wanted to cancel the comic, and couldn't even just wait until the end of a storyline to do so. Number 6. Sacrificial lambs. For the savvy comic reader, some characters may as well just have a target painted on their foreheads and a note taped to their shirt saying, "I will die in the next 7 issues." Death is a convenient way to shake up the stakes and drama, but if it's too predictable, you can totally counteract that, as the majority of readers instead become preoccupied with figuring out how and when they'll die. This is doubly unfortunate when said doomed character is a romantic interest of the protagonist, as any storylines they have together are gently ruined. After all, if you strongly suspect that the only reason the pair are having all of these sweet romantic moments is to make it all the more dramatic for our hero when the partner finally dies, well, the impact of these instances is totally sabotaged. By all means, have dramatic deaths, but adventuring outside of killing off parents and love interests is crucial when you want to surprise your readers and not have them immediately spot who will be having a tragic death at some point in the series. Number 5. Real-world characters. Everyone likes a bit of real-world cameo in their comics now and then. Seeing Stan Lee and other comic creators in their worlds they have helped build and popularize is always a nice touch, and it can even be interesting to see celebrities briefly feature. That is, so long as they're being who they say they are. Now, comic creators, well, they get a free pass because they're absolute scamps, but seeing anyone else that you can visually recognize from our world just pop into a comic as somebody they're not is one of the most accidentally jarring things imaginable. Because how could you simply focus on the plot when Guy Fieri is just chilling out in it like he isn't the king of Flavortown, but rather just some random dude, as was the case in a delightfully strange little Batman moment. Again, this isn't a bad thing, but goddamn if it doesn't make you forget every single detail that you've read in every page before sometimes. Who the hell's Batman? Is he a friend of Guy Fieri's? That's what I was thinking. Number 4. Time delays between issues. Since comics are, on a very basic level, just books that come out on a weekly or monthly basis, there's always a chance that they will be subject to delays. Add in the fact that having said issues painstakingly planned, written, and illustrated, and it's clear that there are a high chance of delay for comics. This said, the fact that it's understandable that delays happen doesn't detract from the fact that they suck. If you've been grabbing issues as they come out, a delay can totally ruin the flow that you've got with the series, and if the next issue is held back for long enough, you can be left with only a vague memory of what actually went on in the story previously. Although many series have been subject to this, the most notorious currently is Doomsday Clock. While people were fascinated to see how bringing the Watchmen universe into the larger DC canon would work, many were dissuaded by the huge delays that it has experienced. Doomsday Clock was scheduled to begin in November 2017 and finish December of next year. While it did begin at the time planned, there were increasingly large breaks between issues, with the end result being that it finished a whole year later than was initially set out. Number 3. Needless sexualization. Now, there's nothing wrong with folks being sexy in a comic or 3. In fact, it's arguably a pretty good thing, but there is a time and a place for it, and yet this seems to be totally thrown out of the window quite a lot of the time. When somebody is being attacked or otherwise in a terrifying or upsetting situation, the absolute last thing that the art should be focusing on is making them do a sexy pose or shot. Worrying about the fate of a character and if they're going to die is not the time to be checking them out, and the fact that there's sometimes crossover with these concepts is more than a little unnerving. Comics tend to have gotten better at choosing their moments nowadays, but it's still more than a little jarring anytime this type of scenario shows up. And it does. Number 2. Out-of-character moments. No character should be limited on being solely one type of way. Batman, for example, is a terror to anyone even vaguely involved in crime who uses intimidation to get information and ruthlessly pursues his goals with a terrifying level of commitment, but he's also a loving dad to his biological and adopted children, making sure to take them out for fast food and have film nights with them. But there are certain things that we expect out of well-established characters, like, for example, that Batman and Superman won't kill unless they're basically forced to do so, or that Deadpool won't stop making quips until he's dead, and even then there's still a chance that he'll carry on with it in the afterlife. As such, seeing these figures do things that are completely out of line with their usual morals and behavior is surreal at best. For example, seeing the Dark Knight make passionate love to Black Canary meters away from the corpses of some criminals that he just burnt to death in All-Star Batman feels, well, wrong on so many levels. And number 1, superhero-based ads. Now, this is slightly less of an issue now, especially for those who deal with comics solely in the virtual world, but for a good old while, comics were rife with simply surreal ads. This was no issue when they were clearly not related to the rest of the comic, but occasionally they'd be made just close enough to the actual line itself to make you think that it was actually a part of it. For example, having Doomsday trying to sell me a goddamn Snickers is just so weird. It might make you laugh every now and again, and you might enjoy the comic more for the incredibly odd ad that's just rocked up halfway through, but it will definitely distract you from the rest of your read, as you'll have to make sure that every page is now actually the comic that you're trying to read and not just an elaborate marshmallow ad or something. And there we go, those were 10 things that comic fans found too distracting. I hope that you enjoyed that, my friends, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comments section below. If you want to chat to me further, you can do so over on Twitter at RetroJ, or you can swing by Live and Let's Dice as my personal gaming channel, where I stream every single Wednesday and Sunday. As always, I've been Jules, you have been awesome, never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.